Well, our guest today has spent 5 decades at the heart of global journalism, serving as the chief executive of Dow Jones and publisher of the Wall Street Journal. He is the author of the acclaimed memoir, The Bootle Boy, An Untidy Life in News, which charted his journey from post-war Liverpool to the front line of a very, very much changing media world. But he's here today to tell us about his debut fiction novel, which is a crime novel that has so much of his life in it, and yet he might argue none of his life in it, depending on where we go with this conversation. Welcome to Les Hinton. Nice to see you, Les.
Thanks very much for the build-up. I heard it'll be too big getting out of the studio.
People are going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out where you're from, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's talk about the book, which you've described recently as being an accidental thriller. I love that title, that description. Talk to me about that.
Well, no, I mean, I wanted to write an exciting book that went into the real world of our present world of media in particular, which is, to say the least, I think we can go into this too, troubled. Yeah. I wrote it, and everyone kept telling me it was a thriller. I thought, well, that suits me. I don't mind.
Yeah.
In fact, I probably would like to have written a thriller, so that I did was great. But I've done that and harvested a lot of my actual life in doing it. The one thing about writing fiction, which I'd never done before, I've written millions of words for print, but was the fact that when you live a life as a journalist, which I did, and also as an executive, you're building up this a massive amount of information and experience. I mean, I've been in war zones and seen piles of corpses. I've been eye to eye with presidents, looking cold-eyed into the eyes of Netanyahu, all these things. And suddenly when you come to write about people and write about experiences, you don't exactly replicate all the things you've been through.
Yes.
But if you understand real hardship or real suffering or real a really broken heart, then you can actually transmute that into fiction. So it's really, in a way, I found what you do is sit there and harvest your own life.
Yeah, I love
to
that.
Write the book.
You infuse the emotional impact of the actual stories that you've encountered in some respects, and the people you've met. But you don't necessarily have to say, this is somebody who's the leader of Israel or Palestine.
No,
you
exactly.
can simply say, but the emotion of looking at somebody in the eye and saying, those eyes remind me of that, or that expression reminds me of her. Is that that's the kind of thing?
Exactly. But I mean, that's exactly the point. And I know there are people who are going to read this book, and some who already have seen early copies of it. They're going to say, "Oh, that's so and so."
That's so and so.
The thing is, I mean, there's a depiction in there of a media mogul in his 90s whose face is carved in with all the dirty tricks and stresses of his life. But it's not.
It's not
Rupert Murdoch.
I was going to say it's not he who shall not be named.
Exactly.
It's not Rupert Murdoch.
We have just a moment of silence after his name comes out. And there are others. There's a brutal, vulgar media mogul. And I've met many media moguls over the years. And he's he reminds some people of
who may not have fallen off a boat at some stage.
No, that's exactly right.
Am I right?
You made that. Yeah. But I mean that kind of sort of amalgamation of experience. But it's not just that. It is if you're trying to like, there are moments in it of really high fear. And although I can't compare my experiences to the sort of fear that accumulate towards the end of the book, I was, for a time, until I changed my mind about wanting to be, I experienced war, and so I know what it feels like to be profoundly terrified
and affected by it.
But you've got it there, and you can summon a version of that for what you're writing about in your fiction. So it's fiction, but it's fed by facts.
I appreciate that. Fiction fed by facts is great. Hold on to that for your next interview.
That's mine. Don't you use it?
No, I won't use it. I can't. It's now it's copyright written in front of our eyes. It's funny, as a newspaper guy, because you were a journalist for so long. Before you became, as you say, management and executive. And I'm a words guy. You're not a wordsmith. I love words and reading.
I was told when I was leading in that he'll have a copy of Dying Days in front of him, and he's a bookworm.
There you go.
I said, "Oh, great."
You've been well informed. And I often say, if you come across a sentence or this collection of words, which is a sentence, I'll say chapter title. Sometimes somebody will say a certain thing and you go, that's a chapter title.
That's a chapter title.
Do you know what I mean by that?
No,
or
absolutely.
you probably say that's a headline.
No, but a headline, but also you'll hear something, or you'll see someone walking down the street in a particular way with that, like, I don't know, you look at a young a young teenage girl, for
Yeah.
instance, and you'll see that awkward foal-like walk.
the newborn foal.
That she hasn't
Yeah.
actually learned to live in her skin yet. And
That's right.
And those are the kinds of things you'll think, oh, that's
But
it.
that's you have is it 5 children?
5 children,
So-
six grandchildren.
6 grandchildren.
Yeah.
So and I have 2 daughters, and I think when you're fortunate enough to have that in your life,
Yeah.
and like you described beautifully, the newborn foal when they're going to their first discos,
Yeah.
and then they not the ugly duckling. I wouldn't like to say that about anyone, but when the swans arrive. And they're now 18, 19, and they're young women or young men, and you just it's just all
They've
the
just
different.
learned. They've learned.
Yeah. Like a bird learning to fly. Like
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
The way they walk. Yeah.
But let's come back to your accidental thriller, so-called, and I was intrigued by the garden party at the beginning of this story, because I was at one quite recently that was run by, I was invited to by people in this august building.
We were both there.
You were there at the same one.
Right,
That is so funny.
I've been to that. I've been to that particular event.
How many times?
Countless.
For more years than I care to remember.
20 or 30 times.
All right, so I'm walking around this just for people. So it's this party, and it's a real nice ticket to get, if you like, and you'll see a couple of prime ministers, former and maybe present, and you will see famous presenters and sports people. It's a who's who. It's like the pages of Hello magazine emptied out into a garden.
Yes.
Now,
so you know how I built that story.
but I didn't want to make a complete connection, but clearly there's shades of that in there, and this comes back to what you were saying, which is there's part of your tapestry you brought in, not the whole set of wool, if you like.
Yeah, but it's true. But as well as that, I've been to similar events in Washington, with presidents, and in New York with all the great plutocrats.
Yeah,
and there's all that there, and there's always this kind of great sort of tournament of egos going on.
There's the headline. There's another headline. Yeah.
You can see all that beautiful way they all dance around each other, and they're all more polite to each other than they actually feel inside.
Yeah.
And
it's
you
like
see
one of
all
those
that.
Elizabethan dances where it's
exactly right. So like it's all very coordinated.
Choreographed. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you took that as an example of something to start off the book, as if to say nothing could possibly go wrong, because it's so gilded.
Yes.
And yet here we go. So why don't you pitch the story to our listeners who haven't read the book? And it begins off at this party, obviously.
Well, right. It's the book Dying Days. I must keep saying Dying Days.
Dying Days. Yeah.
It is basically set in the world of media, and it's called Dying Days partly because of the fact that the old newspaper business, which I grew up in and enjoyed immensely, is kind of vanishing. The notion of a newspaper
as we know it.
Yes. Well, that's a whole other matter. But that's fading away, and then you align that fact, which is why Dying Days partly is called that, with the fact that when you look at any Gallup poll about media, it's never been less trusted.
Yeah.
And it's never been less trusted, above all. I mean, there are lots of reasons, but above all, because the sources of information for people are now so atomized. Everyone would buy a couple of newspapers going back 40 years or so. Now, most people, the vast majority of people never do, but they have this little gadget in their hands that is an infinite source of both receiving information, entertainment, but news, alleged news, and a huge power, if they can get people to listen to them, to say whatever on earth they want. And what on earth they want to do is often insult people, say things that aren't true, and there comes a point where and of course this use of the media is propagated by various immensely powerful people who will tell lies so often that in the end people aren't sure what they can believe. I mean, this is not a new idea. I think Jonathan Swift in the early 1700s says that fiction goes out and the truth comes limping after, and by the time the truth is known, it's too late.
It's too late.
He said it much more eloquently.
No, I know what you're saying, though.
And that is the world we live in now. So there are still a huge majority of people in America, and probably here too, who actually believe that the first election, that the second election that Donald Trump held, which he lost, that they still believe that it was stolen and that he should have been re-elected. But there's absolutely no evidence. But the power of repeated,
but it's Orwell.
Malign.
It's Orwell.
Yeah, it is.
It's just battering you over the truth, over the head, with the mistruth masquerading as the fact.
And who would have I mean, Orwell was a wonderful warning story. I remember reading it as a kid. I'm sure you did too.
Yeah.
It was a great, terrifying warning story.
1984, yeah.
Now, well, you can look at lots of ways in which that's become. We don't have TV screens or TV cameras in our living rooms, but we've got them everywhere else.
They're everywhere
I mean,
else.
in my journey from southwest London to here,
Yeah.
I'll be on 100 or so.
You're never going to be allowed to go missing, you know.
They'll find it. Yeah.
You'll always.
So that atmosphere I
Yes.
was trying to project in Dying Days.
Yes.
And I suppose what I wanted to do, because I wanted it to be, it was to use these basic facts that everyone's aware of and create a kind of apocalyptic consequence
Yes.
of this kind of repeated lying. And so as the story builds, I mean, there's a big event at the end of the
Yes.
first chapter, a tragic event, multiple deaths, and there are subsequent ones. I mean, the other reason it's called Dying Days is because of the high body count among both press barons and their editors.
Yes.
I mean, there is a mysterious group who set out to kill leading journalists and their proprietors.
And is this you projecting? Is this fantasy fiction?
This is fiction. But what is true is that you look at the number of journalists that are not just here and in America, but the number of journalists that are killed.
Russia, particularly.
The Middle East.
Yeah.
So the hostility towards journalists and the reduced credibility of what they do is, I think, when you think about the whole world is societies, healthy societies are chained together by a trust, an understanding, a forbearance.
Yeah.
And when enough lies are told, and then there are counter lies, I think things start to fracture.
Yeah.
And you can see a fracture in America. You can see the dangers of it here. And I'm not picking sides. It's just a question of who's telling the truth and whatever happened to forbearing and tolerating and understanding.
Well, that's it. There has been an erosion of so many of the things you're talking about. Civil discourse, R.I.P. And you know, the fact that anyone with a phone can say I'm a journalist, that drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Because I don't know who an AI. I don't know what to believe when I see things now. And I'm meant to be smart enough to be able to tell the difference between one thing and another. But it's moving at such a rate and such a pace. I love a newspaper because I really believe that most of the people writing for them have earned their trade, know what they're writing about, have their contacts, and they're going to write it for fear of being sued if they write the wrong thing. Yeah. So I still believe in that, but I think I might be a dying breed. I may be one of the dying days people.
But it's true. You look at the trusted newspapers, and in this country, newspapers like the Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they are trusted more than most forms of media, but less than they used to be.
Yeah.
And that's the
erosion issue.
And when they make mistakes, which they do, and which one of the newspapers here made the other day, there's this great, oh my God, here they go again. Yeah. But in fact, most of the time, it is mistakes rather than malign deceit that you see in newspapers.
Yes. Okay. I just want to talk a little bit about yourself because you had the most peripatetic youth I think I've ever heard. In that you lived in how many countries?
Between the age of 5 and 15, I would have lived in 10 countries and gone to about 11, 12 different schools.
Very exotic countries too. I mean, this is your father. He was in the military.
My dad was in the army during the war, and he stayed on, and so he ended up being in Egypt way back in the days when there was still a monarchy there.
Yeah.
Then we went to Eritrea, near Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Then we went to Libya, Tripoli. We lived in Tripoli.
Amazing. And do you remember that with fondness or fury?
You know, it's a very. I think I left school at 15 without any useful education.
Yeah.
So I often regret that. But then I think, well, what did I learn? What have I got from that feeling? And when I travelled, I think also because when I worked for the company I worked for, Rupert Murdoch's company.
Yes.
I because I travelled so much, when he got me to move from here to Los Angeles to London to Boston, I realised then this kind of peripatetic life, as you describe it, had equipped me.
You were able
to move. Yeah. I was accustomed to being a stranger at the gate, basically.
Interesting, lovely. So you're a geographical chameleon who could shapeshift when required because you had been
through it all before.
You'd soldiered.
Because the other thing is I didn't know any different. And even now, honestly, if you say to me, where's home? it's terrible to admit, but I don't have an answer.
Is that
I
right?
I do not. There's nowhere where I think, like where would you like, for instance, you're often asked, especially at my age, where would you like to die? And I think,
Does someone ask you that?
I don't really care.
Does somebody ask you that?
Yeah, I've been asked that question.
After a few glasses of wine,
but
maybe.
also it's fair to say you think about it yourself.
I bet you do. I'm not quite there yet, Les.
No.
But you know, all a good time. You in your journalism days, you were responsible for you were the first journalist on the scene in 1978 when Sid and Nancy died in the Chelsea Hotel.
Yes.
What a story! So here's the Sex Pistols. They're at the height of their infamy, if you want to call it that, or fame, depending if you're a punk or not.
Yeah.
And there you are. You land. Did you know that there was a fatal situation you were going into, or what happened?
All I knew is that something had happened at the hotel.
Yeah, you were living in New York.
I was living in New York. I was a correspondent based there. I'd gone over there initially to cover going shows my age, the Ford Carter presidential campaign. And I stayed for 20 years. And I went along because I'd heard there was some kerfuffle there, and I knew the Chelsea Hotel was always a very famous place, from Leonard Cohen to Dylan Thomas, all these people stayed there.
RT, Bohemian.
And we knew Vicious was staying there, and I went there, and I couldn't find out who. Someone was dead, and I couldn't find out who was. And I knew he was involved, and in fact, in the end, I saw him taken out by handcuffs. So I called up because you couldn't search. I called up the library in London and said, "What's the name of Sid Vicious's girlfriend?" They gave me the name. I said, "Oh," and I went up to the lieutenant. I said, "Officer, just do me a favour. If I were to say that body leaving was X, would I be on the wrong track?" He looked at me and said, "You'd be perfectly correct."
And that's Nancy.
And that was it, Nancy Spungen. Yeah.
Crikey, isn't that extraordinary?
I got the
so you
story.
got yourself a story then. Which was big. And the reason I bring that up is because as an example of a pretty big story to get in the middle of your career as a journalist. And just reading around you, I've never met you before, but reading around you, I get the sense that you loved the gumshoe work. You loved being a hack, like you loved being a journalist. You liked, knocking on doors. And then here you go then, and Rupert Murdoch turns around and says, "Well, actually, I've got my sights on you to be a manager, to be, as you say, an executive."
Yeah.
I'm going to call this out and ask you, like, was it hard for you to leave the pen and notepad behind?
Let me tell you, I've been asked often about with Dying Days, who is in the book do you identify with? I said, well, I'm not like any of them. I said, but when I was a kid, I wanted to be a war correspondent.
There you go.
And Dan Brazier, who is the principal character in Dying Days, he represented a brave, slightly sort of tempestuous war correspondent. But I tasted a bit of war, not a lot, but in Northern Ireland when it was really bad, and in Cyprus when it was invaded. And it just wasn't for me. So therefore I didn't like doing that, but I loved being on the road. And when I was finally dragged off it, I really was, not quite literally, but almost kicking and screaming. And for years, and even now, I'll have a dream where I'm on a story, or I've failed to find a story, or I've beaten the story, or I'm sitting at one of those old-fashioned telex machines typing out my story to send the tape through the thing to London.
Do you when you say you have a dream, do you literally dream of it when you're in bed at night?
When I'm in bed at night, yes, I do.
Like that's you're talking literally about dreaming about this.
I will literally be, and my most repeated one. It's a balmy day in probably the Caribbean. The weather's lovely, and it's the night before, because the time is advanced, and I'm sitting at a telex, typing out and making the long tape you had to do those days to feed into a machine to send to London, and that's one of my little. And I wake up thinking,
isn't that fun? And we all have these kind of recurrent. People talk about nightmares, but you also have those beautiful fantasies. And in some ways, with Dying Days, with your book, Les, you've kind of fulfilled an element of that fantasy in two ways. One is that you got to type, or however you put it together, and secondly, you got to take, as we began our conversation with, all of those experiences that from that treasure chest of stories and things in your life.
That Dying Days is really a wonderful sort of stew
that's nice.
my life's experiences with a heavy dose of what's always been in my place of vivid imagination. So those two things have been mixed together and simmered, and Dying Days is the result.
Of all the people that you've met, who we know, whether, I don't know if you probably met Carter and Gerald Ford, and you mentioned somebody like Netanyahu, and I saw pictures of you as he is now King Charles III, and Can you think of anyone who you found deeply impressive when you met them, that you always think when you're having a drink with your wife or whatever, you think, I'll never forget that person. They were
actually, in different ways. I mean, I remember meeting Bill Clinton at Downing Street. John Major, the Prime Minister, introduced me to Bill Clinton when he was president, and I sort of was pressing against him. We were talking about Northern Ireland, and he knew a lot about it because he was a Rhodes Scholar at the time, and he knew Bernadette Devlin.
Yes.
Well, he didn't know, but he knew who she was.
And he was quoting Heaney.
And I always thought that he was a decent man with huge quirks, but there were huge quirks. And I mean, one of the most controversial people that I really remain very fond of is Rupert Murdoch.
Yes.
And he can be a really difficult man, in fact, really a pain in the neck a lot of the time. But he was an honest, good, he was a brilliant boss. He suffered a lot of criticism over the years, some of which he deserves. But I'm quite sure that history, he's now 94, that history will find a balance, that he was one of the great... It was a great colossus of his time in the media before the tech bros took over. Yeah,
they don't make them like him anymore. That's for sure. The tech bros are a different story.
They're a different story, and they're much more powerful and much more. You know, when we talk about the spread of misinformation by media, and you imagine what kind of technology Facebook set loose and Twitter set loose. For
sure.
They gave the whole world a stage. Now, that's wonderful things to do with that, because revolutions have succeeded, a real upheaval happened, but also this terribly toxic world has sort of swamped so much else.
I think that whole world of social media and everything is a dance with the devil, isn't it?
It is, but it's still, in the end, it's fine. It's like AI.
Yeah.
Everyone panics about AI, but I can't help sort of asking a few questions now and then.
No, I know. And people freaked out when radio came along, and then they freaked out when television came along. So there's a generational freak out. I think we're having our AI freak out now. I have to say, Les, congratulations on Dying Days. A terrific page turner, and this is your first. I feel there's more to come.
There's more to come with this gang.
Very much so. There have been many more garden parties to destroy along the way. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, that was a pleasure.
Really enjoyed that. Les Hinton, our guest today. The book is called Dying Days, available in all decent bookshops online, wherever you get your books, and a great cracking thriller for a Christmas present, by the way. Go for it. You won't regret it. We'll be back shortly.